Welcome to Wisdom Trek with Gramps. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, and we are on day 2483 of our trek. The purpose of Wisdom Trek is to create a legacy of wisdom, to seek out discernment and insights, and to boldly grow where few have chosen to grow before. In today's Wisdom Nugget, we are focusing on Psalm 29, a powerful and majestic psalm of David that directs our attention to the overwhelming glory of God displayed through his voice and his creation. Psalm 29 offers us a vivid picture of God's sovereignty over nature and his ability to command the forces of the earth with his voice. Through the sounds of thunder, the strength of storm, the power of water, we see an unmatched might of God. Yet, in the end, this psalm also reveals that God, in his great power, blesses his people with strength and peace. So let's read through Psalm 29, verses 1 through 11 from the New Living Translation. Honor the Lord with your heavenly beings. Honor the Lord for his glory and strength. Honor the Lord for the glory of his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. The voice of the Lord echoes above the sea. The God of the glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty sea. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord splits the mighty cedars. The Lord shatters the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon's mountains skip like a calf, and makes Mount Hermon leap like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord strikes with bolts of lightning. The voice of the Lord makes the barren wilderness quake. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord twists mighty oaks and strips the forest bare. In his temple everyone shouts, "Glory!" The Lord rules over the floodwaters. The Lord reigns as king forever. The Lord gives his people strength. The Lord blesses them with peace. Psalm 29 begins with a call to honor and worship the Lord. In verses 1 and 2, David says, "Honor the Lord, you heavenly beings. Honor the Lord with his glory and strength. Honor the Lord for the glory of his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness." Here David is calling his heavenly beings, the angels, and all those in the spiritual realm to give honor and praise to God. He is asking them to recognize the magnificence of God's glory and strength. This call to worship is an invitation of all creation, both heavenly and earthly, to recognize and praise the name of the Lord for who he is. David emphasizes worshiping the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. God is holy, set apart, and his very being is majestic. His glory shines brighter than anything in creation, and it is only fitting that all creatures, especially those in the heavenly realm, would bow down and worship before him. For us today, this call extends beyond the spiritual beings. It's a reminder that we, too, are called to honor and worship God. He deserves our reverence and awe for his power and holiness. In verses 3 and 4, David introduces the powerful imagery of God's voice. The voice of the Lord echoes above the sea. The God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty sea. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. Here David uses the metaphor of a storm over the waters to describe the voice of the Lord. In ancient times, the sea represented chaos and uncontrollable power, but David shows that God's voice is supreme even over the mighty sea. His voice is described as thunder, echoing above the waters, signifying his authority and majesty. When we hear thunder during a storm, it is a sound that commands attention. It shakes us to the core. David is drawing a parallel to the way God's voice moves us through creation. It is a force that cannot be ignored. His voice is full of power and majesty, commanding the elements of the earth and reflecting in his sovereign rule. David continues this theme of God's voice in verses 5 through 7, expanding the imagery from the seas to the forest and the mountains. The voice of the Lord splits the mighty cedars. The Lord shatters the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon skip like a calf. He makes Mount Hermon leap like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord strikes with bolts of lightning. In these verses, David paints a vivid picture of the Lord's voice shaking the most powerful aspects of earth. The cedars of Lebanon were known for their strength and size. Some were the largest and the strongest trees in the region. Yet the voice of the Lord is so powerful that it can split and shatter even the mighty cedars. David also describes the mountains skipping and leaping, comparing them with young animals full of energy and movement. This imagery shows that even the most immovable objects on earth, the mountains, respond to God's voice with trembling and movement. The mention of lightning adds to the intensity of this scene. God's voice strikes like bolts of lightning, illuminating the sky and demonstrating his power in the most dramatic ways. This is a reminder that God's power is unmatched, and his voice alone can cause the strongest and most stable parts of creation to quake. David doesn't stop there. In verses 8 and 9, he takes us into the wilderness. The voice of the Lord makes the barren wilderness quake. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord twists the mighty oaks and strips the forest bare. In his temple everyone shouts, "Glory!" The wilderness, often seen as a desolate and empty place, is not exempt from God's powerful voice. David mentions the wilderness of Kadesh, a significant area in Israel's history where the Israelites wandered. Even this barren land quakes at the sound of God's voice. The image of oaks twisting and the forest being stripped bare further emphasizes the power of God's voice. Nothing in creation can withstand his voice. It shakes the very foundations of the earth. Yet amid this display of power, David gives us a glimpse of worship. He says, "In his temple everyone shouts, 'Glory!'" The appropriate response to witnessing God's power is worship. The people of the temple are in awe of the Lord's majesty and respond with a shout, "Glory!" This is a call for us, as God's people, to recognize his glory in all he does and respond with praise and worship. David concludes this psalm in verses 10 and 11 by affirming God's sovereignty and his care for his people. The Lord rules over the floodwaters. The Lord reigns as king forever. The Lord gives his people strength. The Lord blesses them with peace. Even amid chaotic waters, thunderstorms, and earth-shaking events, God remains in control. He is not subject to the forces of nature. He reigns over them. The references to the floodwater reminds us of the great flood in the days of Noah, when God demonstrated his power over the entire earth. And yet, despite the incredible display of power, God reigns as a loving and faithful king forever. In verse 11, David shifts from describing God's power over nature to his care for his people. The Lord gives his people strength. The Lord blesses them with peace. After all the thunder, lightning, and shaking described in this psalm, we see God's intention was not to instill fear, but to provide us strength and peace to those who belong to him. This is the heart of God's character. He is mighty, sovereign, and powerful beyond our comprehension. But he is also compassionate and caring. He strengthens his people when they are weak and blesses them with peace even amid life's storms. As we reflect on Psalm 29, we are reminded of the overwhelming power of God's voice. He commands the elements of the earth, the seas, the mountains, the forests, and the wilderness. His voice thunders, shakes, and splits the very foundations of creation. But in the midst of all this, God reigns as king who cares deeply for his people. God's power is not something to fear, but to stand in awe of. His voice, which can shake the heavens and the earth, is the same voice that blesses us with strength and peace. And the proper response to witnessing his glory is worship. As the people in the temple shout, "Glory!" in recognition of his majesty, we are called to lift our voices in praise and honor to God. So as we continue on our journey on this wisdom trek, let's remember that our God who commands the forces of nature is the same God who walks with us, strengthens us, and gives us peace. Let us lift our hands in worship and declare his glory in all that we do. Thank you for joining me on this leg of our wisdom trek. Until the next time, keep seeking God's wisdom, keep trusting in the Lord, keep walking the path of faith, and be encouraged to continue your journey with God's voice guiding your steps. And if you found this podcast insightful, please subscribe and leave us a review. Then encourage your friends and family to join us and come along with us tomorrow for another day of Wisdom Trek, creating a legacy. Thank you so much for allowing me to be your guide, your mentor, and most importantly, I am your friend as I serve you through the Wisdom Trek podcast and journal. And as we take this trek of life together, let us always live abundantly, love unconditionally, listen intentionally, learn continuously, lend to others generously, lead with integrity, and leave a living legacy each day. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, reminding you to keep moving forward, enjoy your journey, and create a great day every day. See you next time for more daily wisdom.